Not guilty. That's the verdict handed down to Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher over murder charges in the killing of an ISIS fighter.
Yeah, I'm happy and I'm thankful. And, thank God and my legal team and my wife.
Well, there it is. Here to break down the trial that captivated many across the country, senior legal fellow from the Heritage Foundation, Cully Stimson. Thanks for coming on. What did you make of yesterday? A big day.
Well, the military justice system worked. You know, this jury, 7 battle-hardened Marines, a Navy SEAL, and a Navy officer, listened to the judge, listened to all the evidence, and rendered a verdict. And remember, you didn't even have to prove this case unanimously to this jury. Only 6 out of the 7, 3/4 of the jury were required to find him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and the prosecution failed. They did find him guilty of posing with a corpse, and so he has a federal conviction, which he will now have on his record for the rest of his life, unless it's pardoned. But the system worked.
What do we learn from this going forward?
Well, I think a few things, Jillian. One is you really do need now to move to the point where you have career prosecutors and career defense counsel in the JAG Corps. And I'm a JAG. I'm a captain in the Navy Reserves. I'm speaking as a Heritage Fellow, however. And, you know, DAs and public defenders all around the country have career tracks for folks like that. And having a lieutenant, with all due respect to the lieutenant, try this case, he would be a misdemeanor prosecutor in most DA offices. And whether or not an experienced prosecutor would have even brought these charges is something that we can think about. But the fact is that the government thought that they could prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. They failed. Now Senior Chief Gallagher has been acquitted of the most serious charges, but he has a federal conviction. And by the way, the military can now try to fire him administratively. So his challenges to stay in the Navy are not over.
Yeah, but he won't be going to jail. Let's take a look at the charges, what he was found not guilty of, and then guilty on the right there, obviously. As we look those over, you know, it does seem, as you were saying, that there was a prosecutorial, real mistakes were made. They didn't have nearly the evidence they needed. And then, of course, there was that moment when the guy on the stand says, well, I covered the breathing tube, and I'm the one that killed him. How does a prosecution make mistakes like this? I mean, it just seemed really irresponsible.
Lack of experience, frankly. Yeah. Look, when I was a federal prosecutor out in town, or a state homicide prosecutor, and you had a cooperating witness, and you got to the point where you wanted to give that person immunity, you would do a 360-degree wraparound discussion with the person to make sure there was no wiggle room, so when they got on the stand, they could squirt out and say something favorable to the other side. And clearly they did not debrief this medic, Petty Officer Scott, thoroughly, such that it allowed Scott to go forward and say what he said on the stand, that he put his thumb over the breathing tube. Now, the government says that he did not tell the truth, or at least didn't tell a consistent statement on the stand with what he said earlier during the debrief. So they say they're looking into perjury charges. But if that's the case, and it might be, then the prosecution, during the trial, when Petty Officer Scott, the medic, blurted that out, should have torched him on cross-examination and held him to account. And clearly he didn't have the experience to do that, and that must have had some factor as this jury deliberated for over 5 hours.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly not the end. Thank you very much, Cully. We appreciate it.